Welcome to Part 7 in our series, Jazz from its Origins to the Present. In this section, we'll be talking about hard bop and beyond. In cool jazz that we had talked about before, the drummers were usually restricted to a much lighter, more precise background type of beat. The new movements, the funky style or hard bop, were inspired by soul singer Ray Charles, Mahalia Jackson, and many others. Some of the new drummers like Art Blakey and Max Roach started to incorporate some new polyrhythms into their drumming style along with some very aggressive accents. Here is an example of some of the cross rhythms or the polyrhythms that were used in many of these different new jazz styles. Sonny Rollins was one of the hip, new, dominant, modern saxophonists of this new style of jazz. Sonny Rollins also recorded many tunes with Miles Davis. Let's listen to one of the Sonny Rollins tunes called Way Out West. Many musicians visited other countries to study their styles. Art Blakey went to Africa and studied the drumming styles of their culture. He incorporated many of those styles into his new style of playing, which included tapping on the side of the drum and using his elbow to change the pitch on the drum head. One of the first pianists of the Jazz Messengers was Horace Silver. He left the group in the mid-50s and went to New York. At that time, he then recorded with many other people like Lester Young and Miles Davis. One of the techniques that Horace Silver used in his compositions was the same type of bebop pattern of having the musicians play in unison. He then added some other materials that were written riffs and linking passages. Here is a piece performed by Horace Silver called Doodlin. Bassist and composer Charles Mingus was a very serious musician. He played with Charles Parker too. Charles Mingus was a leader of many small groups in the 1950s and was known as a tyrant. In the middle of the performances, he would often tell the musicians exactly what he wanted and try to fit his concept of what the piece was. Mingus decided that he would like to use some very dissonant harmonies in some of the compositions that he wrote, and in fact he started to not write down some of the improvisations that he wanted the musicians to play and wanted to teach it to them by ear. Let's listen to a piece right now that's in that same kind of dissonant format called Faubus Fables.
Oh Lord, don't let them shoot us. Oh Lord, don't let them stab us. Oh Lord, don't let them try and tether us. Oh Lord, no more swastikas.
musicians that we've mentioned previously is Miles Davis. He was a new kind of player and actually was very talented at creating some of the best groups around and not getting in their way, allowing them to play. Another kind of weird technique that he used to use was to turn his back on the audience and just kind of play to himself. Like many other musicians, Miles Davis was also a little fearful of this new technique of cutting and pasting all of the music together based on various takes. He was afraid that it might discourage the spontaneity of jazz. One of the most influential pieces of Miles Davis was a 32-bar song form that included a bass melody line at the beginning, which was very unusual, with the band kind of responding back to them in what sounded exactly like the name of the composition, So What? John Coltrane went from being an obscure sideman in the Miles Davis Quartet to one of the most influential modern saxophonists. He was a very serious musician and was often known as the father of the avant-garde jazz movement. Despite the fact that Miles Davis and John Coltrane had their differences of opinion, they did perform together and recorded many great albums. One of the albums that he recorded was a piece called Giant Steps. Giant Steps is a fast-moving piece at 290 beats per minute. Enjoy. Coltrane formed his own group and started to incorporate some of the best musicians around. He also experimented with some other instruments and included the soprano saxophone on many of his compositions. John Coltrane studied the music of other cultures and incorporated spirituality into many of his pieces. One of John Coltrane's worldwide hits was a piece called A Love Supreme, and in this piece there were 4 different movements: Acknowledgement, Resolution, Pursuance, and Psalm. Let's listen to one of those now, Acknowledgement. Ornette Coleman was a saxophonist that played blues and bebop. He did want to get away from the standard kind of format, however, because he felt it was limiting, and he wanted to be able to play his own interpretation of these different styles of music. Coleman often took a traditional 12-bar blues and played it to his own interpretations. Coleman was thinking about starting a more popular group sound, and in 1975 started the electric group called Primetime. This new electric group featured 2 electric guitars, 2 basses, and 2 drummers. In 1985 and 1986, Ornette Coleman toured with Pat Metheny, who was a fan of his and a well-known fusion artist. To end part 7 of our series, Jazz from its Origins to the Present, let's listen to an Ornette Coleman piece, Chronology.